Did we get it? Did we get it? There we are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. My name is Jeff Fritz, and today is March 1st, 2021. It's beautiful, it's sunny outside. This is C# with CSharpFritz, and we've got a new topic starting today. We've got a new series, a new season that we're going to go through. And it's going to be Blazor. This was the third topic that folks were interested in learning more about. We're going to cover Blazor here live on stream, answering your questions, getting involved a little bit more with learning about, and we're going to get hands-on. We're going to get down into the nitty-gritty on some of the content around Blazor. We're not just going to talk about the basic samples and pushing components around. We're going to get down into some of the more interesting parts, passing data between Blazor components and pages, and how we integrate with other applications, how we go and implement security. We've got a whole month or two planned ahead where we're going to be talking all about Blazor right here on the stream. And of course, if you're watching the YouTube video, you should be looking forward to about 4 to 8 episodes. So far, I've got 4 episodes planned, but I think at least 2 of them are 2, maybe 3 or 4 episodes in there. We'll break those down. We'll talk more about it. Let me say hello to the folks that are here in the chat room today. There they are. They're right there. Hello, the Goose of Wild. Good to see you with the Zamagon icon there. Of course, if you're watching live on Twitch, there's a bunch of better TTV emotes that you can use here. Chris Jones is here. Hello, good day. Happy March 1st to you. Motown Andy, almost easy. Stelzy is here. Nerd Herder, hello world. Ancient Coder, happy Monday to you. There's a missed opportunity. Where's the Blazor? See, we can't bring that out every time. We need to take our time and bring that out only when it's appropriate. There's a time and place for the Blazor. And we'll get there. It'll make an appearance, absolutely. Good morning to you in Cordova, Tennessee. Orgbrat, good to see you. Shildorian, cool. How you doing there? What's my WPM? My words per minute? How fast do I type? 80, 90, something like that. Whatever. How you doing there, Excellent Dragon? Welcome in. Hope you've got some coffee, a nice cup of coffee, or whatever your caffeinated beverage of choice might be, to get things started here today. How you doing there, Smab? Welcome in. Ancient Coder with the Blazor icons there. Yes. So, there's autofocus. I've got a new camera here that I just installed, and it's got a little bit of autofocus still turned on. I'm not going to go and tinker with that just yet. So, the other thing that this is the start of Minimal March. Now, over on my channel, on the CSharpFritz channel, we're going to spend the month at the command line with .NET, using and building with .NET in ways that really use a minimal amount of hardware, a minimal amount of tools, and we're going to show that you can be productive and have a fantastic experience using all kinds of things that aren't Windows, that aren't Visual Studio 2019. But over here on this stream, some of the questions that we've gotten every now and again are around, gosh, it'd be really great if you could show us on a Mac or on Linux. So over here, for this series, we're going to be developing in Linux with Visual Studio Code all month long. I've got a couple different pieces of hardware here. We'll rotate into the mix, but today we're going to start off. We're going to be using a Linux laptop that my friends at KFocus lent me. This is their Kubuntu install running. It's their Model M laptop. It's got a ton of memory on it, 64 gig. It's got an i7 10,000 series processor. So really good machine that hopefully isn't slowing us down here as we're going along. We're going to have a good time writing some code together. Hey, Jason, good to see you. Yeah, we're talking about computer stuff. Dr. Einstein von Brainstorm, good to see you. 7:30 p.m. in India. Welcome in. I hope you enjoy your evening with us tonight. You prefer Linux for your .NET development these days? If you're going to be using containers, Kubernetes, you'll find tooling for those tools is just more mature on Linux. You have WSL on Windows. Of course, you can use Hyper-V and host a Linux instance on your Windows machine. I'm going to pull back and go no strings attached here and go completely on a Linux-based machine. There is no Windows to be found here on this machine that we're going to be using today. Is that Goss63? Good evening to you in Greece. Welcome in. Thank you so much for tuning in. So let me head over to the code. Let me make sure I've got the right scene up here, and I'm using a screen capture card so that I can share my Linux desktop. Let me head over there and let's talk a little bit more about the series, about how we're going to use Linux today, and then let's get into learning about Blazor. So let me head over to the code. What do I think about dual boot? Doable. You can do that. You can certainly do dual boot, but there are folks who need to be able to jump back and forth between the various instances of their operating systems a little bit faster. So that's where virtualization really helps those folks. Whether you're doing something like Parallels, Boot Camp, I want to use a couple machines here that are dedicated, that have Linux running right on the hardware. And when we get to May, on my channel, May is for Macs, and we're going to be developing using a Macintosh. So we'll bring that over here as well. In May, we'll be nonstop coding with a Macintosh and making sure that folks that prefer using a Mac get a little bit airtime, that they see their preferred operating system having some fun on stream. I forgot to get music playing. Let me get the music playing here. This is, of course, Stream Beats by our friend Harris Heller. This is music that's free for anybody to download, anybody to use and listen to on your YouTube video, Twitch stream, Facebook stream, wherever it might be. Royalty free, DMCA free. Check it out. You can use this wherever you would like. And I'm going to use the lo-fi playlist today for just some groovy music playing in the background while we write some code together. Thank you so much, Harris. We appreciate you sharing your music with us. Check it out at streambeats.com. They have links for Apple Music, Amazon Music, and Spotify from there to all the different playlists. I think he has 6 playlists now. Really great stuff that you can listen to. And quite frankly, some of it's pretty good to jam to while you're writing code. I've really been enjoying listening to some of this while I'm writing code. $1 million question: which Linux distro? I'm running Kubuntu, so KDE on top of Ubuntu. The folks at KFocus, they really tricked this machine out. They knew they were delivering it to me, so it came with Visual Studio Code installed. It came with the .NET 5 CLI installed. It came with Docker, Kubernetes, all pre-installed, Blender. All the things that as a developer you would want, the Azure Storage Emulator, the Azure CLI, all pre-installed so you could work with them. So that's kind of the advantage of going with a more boutique manufacturer, is they're happy to give you a build that is exactly the image you need to get started and be productive. Let me get into a couple of the questions that we have here in chat, and then we'll talk more about what's going on over here. Let me see here. There's a question, and we'll grab this one. Hey, Chris Jones. Hello, hello. There's a comment from Dr. Einstein. Let me grab that. So, Stelzy has a question here about the laptop. Is it already configured for .NET, or am I needing 2 more streams to configure it like it was in the past? Already configured. Came with it all set up in the box. So all of that I needed to do, done. And now that they've been through that process, for their other customers that ask for .NET to come installed, or for other folks to get it installed, it's now part of a build script for them, so folks can be productive with that. Chris Jones asks, regarding this series, will I be covering how to get set up with things like Sass and Bootstrap compilation this season, similar to what I've done with Clip Talk on my channel? If it's not already covered, no, happy to get into this. This makes sense. So those static resources that you might be using inside your application, Sass, Less, Bootstrap, getting those included into your web application and using something like Blazor makes a lot of sense. We can definitely get into this. I'll put it on the checklist for a future stream here. And give me just a second. I'll add that into the list. Let me go to this comment from Dr. Einstein. Dr. Einstein von Brainstrom says, as a back-end developer, my experience with Blazor is just the Fritz's stream and Visual Studio template but asks, on a high level, would I say Blazor is similar to Django if it had WebAssembly, planning for a personal website with some machine learning projects? Confused between the two. Django is a little bit more of Django is the Python web framework, intended to be very model view controller, where Blazor is very much model view model. It isn't explicitly view model that you're doing, but it very much behaves the same way as a view model. So it's a nice framework. You're not going to get pushed into one architecture or another. But I think what you'll see here is, as Jason is saying, Blazor is a little bit more like React and Angular, where there's a series of configuration that's available for you, and you can go and take that in whatever direction you would like. So there's a bit of freedom here that you can use, but they do the same thing. They really do. So in that they deliver web capabilities. Blazor is really focused more on the user interface construction. ASP.NET Core is flexible and allows you to build all kinds of things, whether it's APIs, gRPC connections, SignalR, live connections out to various services, and clients doing two-way interaction. Blazor is strictly a user interface framework. Which operating system am I using today? Asks Curious Drive. This is Kubuntu that I'm using. And you'll see I have a slightly different, larger pointer. I had to play some games here with resolution to get this working with my capture card. So, but we're all good. We're all good. We're up and running, and we're gonna make sure that it's clear just how easy and productive you can be building with Linux. All the things that I'm going to be doing with Blazor, while I might be doing it with Linux here, you can do on Windows. There's plugins and tools for Visual Studio 2019 that you can use. We're going to use a little bit of Visual Studio Code, but I want to make sure that you know, whatever operating system you're using, there's tools, there's capabilities there that are going to make you productive, and you're going to have a great time writing code. Good morning, Leak Geek. Let me get my gunners on here. All right, let's get into this a little bit. Let's talk about the series. Let me show you what I've got, and we're going to get into the first session here. So here's the GitHub repository, github.com CSharpFritz /C# with CSharpFritz, and it's already fogging up on me, my glasses. So all of the source code, all the samples, there's documentation, there's links, everything that we've done here throughout this series is available. All of the samples that I have today are going to be in here as well. They're sitting in a branch right now. I'll merge that branch when we're done. If you're watching on the YouTube recording, you'll find the link to that just below. You'll find the link to this repository just below, and all of this code will be merged in, and you'll be able to find it under Sessions. Season 3, if you're watching this after additional sessions have been released, there's a child folder here that'll then take you to 0301 Intro to Blazor. And I've got a nice README here with some information to get you started. Rats, it wrapped my quote that I put here. I can fix that real quick, can't I? Can't I? Can I fix that quote? Are you going to let me fix that quote? My markdown is not that strong. It should have. No matter, I'm not going to get into that. Yeah, leave page. I'll just show the quote at some point. No matter. So Blazor, I mentioned it's this web user interface that we're going to be building with today, and folks always have a bunch of questions around this. Who's using it? Why should I choose this over that? And we're gonna talk about some of those things today. I do want to show you. I have a project allocated for the series here, Blazor. There it is. And you can see, here's what we're going to cover today. WebAssembly. WebAssembly hosted on ASP.NET Core. Server-side interactions. The server-side model with WebAssembly. I'm sorry, with Blazor. Components. We're going to talk about pages. We're going to talk about Razor class libraries. Static content. I don't think we're going to get into Razor class libraries today. We might hold off on that. We'll talk about static content. We may get into interaction with JavaScript today. Next time, we're going to be talking about reusing Blazor content and get into all kinds of stuff here. Layouts, sophisticated components, class libraries, CSS isolation, code behind model. See, I think this one's going to end up being 2 or 3 episodes by itself. Service interactions. How do we use HTTP client? Cores. We learned about cores last time. We're going to learn more about cores and how we use it with Blazor here. JSON serialization, SignalR clients, gRPC clients, OpenAPI clients. How we work with all those different services. Securing a Blazor app. I didn't even want to write this stuff here. I was like, there's a lot that we need to figure out and put into this because I'm sure we're going to have a number of questions on that. But let me put into here, let me edit this note, and let's also add, let's add an entry for building, oh my gosh, Fritz. Building with CSS, I'm sorry, SCSS, less, NPM compilation of static content. I have to get used to this keyboard. There we go. So we'll see how that works next time. Not next time, but I'm gonna have to break that up. But it'll probably be 2 or 3 sessions that we cover all of that stuff in, and we get into some samples. I'm going to be writing a couple of really good samples to go with that. You're going to like this course, Curious Drive? Well, thank you. I appreciate the confidence. So let's get in. Let me head over. This is where we're starting. As other questions come up, I will expand the entries that I have here for and break these up appropriately and schedule them. But you're going to see me over. It's probably going to be well into April, maybe into March, into May. We are in March. Maybe into May. I wanted to try and cap this at 8 weeks that we'll be talking about Blazor here on stream. So that's the story here at this point. So let me head back over to, there's the README. So there's a nice README here. I put a couple links, I put a couple images. I didn't fully flesh out descriptions of all the samples. That's okay. We'll go through and talk about it, and we'll actually build samples here today. We're not going to get too much further past some of the templates, but I want to make sure I'm answering your questions. The AMA tag is turned on here if you're watching on Twitch. You can check out the link just below, not the link. Check out the chat over here. Ask your questions. I'll be answering them along the way, and we'll bring them up and highlight them to make sure that they get answered. If you're watching on YouTube, check the description below. There's times and links to all the questions that were asked, that are going to be asked, but were asked because you're watching the record. You know what I mean. Check it out down there, and we'll get into talking about all the cool things with Blazor today. Let me close. I don't need Discord running. I don't need that right now. Good. So, Blazor. Blazor's built with it was originally developed with WebAssembly in mind. This is a user interface framework that allows you to build with C# component-based applications, event-driven applications. We've seen how we can do some events in other ASP.NET Core models, but I want to be able to listen and respond to events inside my pages. A button was clicked, respond to that. All kinds of stuff like that happen, and be able to interact and build build web applications. And if you saw anything from .NET Conf last week, we really like Blazor. And you're going to see, starting with .NET 6, Blazor become more involved in other types of applications, including mobile and desktop. We'll learn more about those when we get out closer to and after the .NET 6 release. And of course, if you're watching this sometime in 2022, there's going to be videos in the archive you can go take a look at. So there's different ways that you can host and you can deploy Blazor. You can do not just WebAssembly, but server-side execution as well. The same contents, the same components, the same pages that you build and work in WebAssembly can be built and deployed and be served in an ASP.NET Core service that runs on a server. And you only deliver minimal changes into the browser. Now we're going to get in, we're going to see just how intricate that is, how that interacts, and see how some of those things fit together in today's session. Like I said, we're not going to go too deep on customizing things. We're going to take a look at the templates, pull them apart, understand a little bit more about how they work, and set up for our next session where we start building some real applications. You can get all the tools you need to build with Blazor. They all come with the .NET SDK, starting with version 3.1 and later. In version 3.1, you only got Blazor Server side, and there was an add-on that came about in May 2020 that gave you Blazor WebAssembly. We recommend you use the .NET 5 SDK that's available now. Using that tool set, you can build for, well, we're going to see 3 different models of Blazor applications that you can build with at the command line in Visual Studio, and hopefully have a good time, be very productive. One of the first questions that we get asked on the .NET team is, well, why should I go and use this if who else is using Blazor? So we've got some customer stories. I want to highlight one here. This one is from a company called The Postage, and I can open this up here. This is from the Microsoft customer stories, and this is a company called The Postage that is using Blazor and Xamarin for their full application development model. And this was just published last month, but you see some of the comments here. I knew we wanted to use .NET and Azure as the best cloud for .NET. What's more, with .NET, we would get access to Blazor and Xamarin, which let us use C# across the entire application stack, from front end to back end to mobile, an approach that has proven to be very effective in terms of both speed and cost. You can read more about The Postage and see a little bit of video about how these folks are using Blazor for their application, for their business at customersmicrosoft.com. You can see there's a link to it right here. I have included a screenshot. You can click the screenshot, you can click the link. They both go to the same place. It's inside the GitHub README for this session. So great, there's a small company. Blazor is also being used and rolled out in several other smaller Microsoft tools, and you're going to see it become part of more and more of the entire application stack that Microsoft makes available. It's a great tool that we're seeing more and more folks interested in using. It's only at a version 1.0 at this point. It's labeled 3.1 or 5, but we're only in the first year of Blazor being available. It's going to take some time for folks to move large applications to it. But if you want to learn about it, you want to figure out and evaluate and decide, hey, let's go decide more about getting involved, we're going to see how you can get started right here at the command line. There's a template built into Visual Studio 2019 as well. File new project, and you'll see the Blazor templates in there. So, yeah, JSON. We saw a bit of it at the MVP Summit we saw it in 2017, 2018, 2019. Very exciting topic to see folks talking about Blazor at the Microsoft MVP Summit. Pat, that's a great comment there. Let me bring that up. You're absolutely right. You've been using Blazor for about 15 months. It's been fun learning at the cutting edge of development. It's always fun to learn something new, and I think that's a big reason why a lot of us get involved in software development is you're always learning. And Blazor is no exception. It's something new to learn, it's something fun that we can get involved with that makes us productive. And as your company grows, as your application grows, because it's a component-based model, we can grow and build our application by adding new components, refactoring, and growing easily the project. Yes, remember way back when there were in-person events in the past? Betancourt has a question here. Is it necessary to use Visual Studio to develop using C#, or is just Visual Studio Code enough? Betancourt, I'll go you one further. I mentioned that this is what I call minimal March, and we're going to be using minimal hardware and minimal tools to be productive with .NET. So you can be very productive with both Visual Studio 2019, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio for Mac. You know what? Let's do a little bit of coding with Vim today and show you that you can use Vim and be productive as well. Any text editor will work great with this. But the Visual Studio products, of course, that's what we make here at Microsoft, and we want to make sure you know you're going to have a great experience with that. But I also want to make sure you know that any text editor will work great. And there are folks at JetBrains, they make Writer. You can use Writer as well. That's a good tool that you can use. But any text editor will make you productive, and that's why I want to highlight here the command line commands to get these things started, because then you can use whatever tool you want. As long as you have a text editor, you're gonna have a good time writing code with this. But of course, full-fledged IDE will give you the ability to debug and profile and all of those other cool things that come along with it. Thank you for the question. Really appreciate that. Oh no, not Vim. Yeah, we'll show a little bit of Vim. Why not? So when you get the .NET command line installed, you can run a .NET new command and generate your first project. So let's get in. Let's look at a first project. You know what? I'm not even gonna work in the samples that are. Nah, I should work in the samples that are right here, because I built them and I made sure that they worked. Let's do this. I'm gonna go down into my source folder. Let me remove all of these things. Thank you. Good. And I can restore them later. No big deal. But if I run .NET new, of course I get my list of all the project templates that are available to me. If I scroll up in here, there I have Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. So those are the two templates that will give you Blazor applications. But that's not the only ways that you can run Blazor. I'll talk about that a little bit more as we get through the models here. Let's start with Blazor with WebAssembly. So I will do .NET new Blazor WASM. WASM, of course, WebAssembly. That's that shorthand that you see there. WASM is shorthand for WebAssembly. So, and I will call this, what did I call it in the thing here? First WebAssembly. All right, there we go. First WebAssembly. So .NET new, I specified the template name, -O says, here's the output folder to write the project into. And that'll write into my WebAssembly folder right there. Well, there it is. I'll drop down into this folder. I'll use Vim to navigate and take a look at some of the code, edit some of this code for this segment. And we'll go over to Visual Studio Code just so you can see that you can use any tool here and still be productive. We'll take a look at the files that are inside of here. So when we saw in ASP.NET Core, we had a www root folder, www root folder. Same thing, still here. You can use that and put all your static files inside of there. And if we take a look, you'll see there's an index file here, an icon file. I have a CSS folder that contain those things that you kind of expect. Inside the sample data is a little JSON file that we're going to use to render some data on screen. No big deal. No big deal. let me show you what's inside. And here, let me split the screen here. Move this over. There we go. And let me get back into that same folder. Come on. Sessions, season 3. That source. There we go. There's my list of content over there. I'm running tmux here so that I can have both sides of my screen running at the same time. So I can see the list of files on this side, and over there is where I'm going to run Vim for a little bit. So let me show you what's inside program. So program's that's kind of where our .NET applications start. Yes, install it, please. So I have OmniSharp installed with Vim so that I can get syntax highlighting for my C# files, just like this one. There it is. And I've got syntax highlighting in Vim for C#. That's pretty cool. Didn't know you could do that, did you? So this looks like a program CS file like we saw with console applications, with ASP.NET Core applications, where I've got a public static async task main. It's starting up my application, and it's got this little builder, just like we saw for our ASP.NET Core apps, that builds my host. In this case, it's a WebAssembly host. It's going to build an application that runs in the browser using HTML5's standard WebAssembly components. That's always available to you. That's always a thing that you can use in every browser. Every modern browser has WebAssembly available to you. So that means whether you're using Windows, Mac, or Linux, Edge, Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Safari, iOS, Android, every browser this will work in. And you're going to have folks are going to have a great experience with it. So we see a builder run here that's going to set up that host, and so we can install things. And it defines a root component called app. We'll see what app is here in a minute. And it provides what looks like a CSS tag here, hash app. And it also defines here services add scoped. Remember we did we talked about dependency injection with ASP.NET Core. Well, here we're adding a scoped object, and it's an HTTP client. So we can make requests to a server, and it's specifying a base address that is the host environment's base address. Localhost 5000 when we run this application. It's saying that's where you're going to make your request to start at. And it says here, run that application. So that's program. Well, what's that app thing, right? Let's take a look at app. This, it looks like some HTML. It looks like some directives here. This is the Blazor router. This is the initial application that runs and guides interactions and requests through your application. And it specifies where the assembly is that contains content that's going to be loaded, right? That's this right here, this app assembly. And it's looking for exact matches to request routes before deciding where to send things. For those routes that it has found, it's going to go and display that content with this route view entry here. If it doesn't match a route, if it requests a page that doesn't exist, well, it's just going to output something that says, sorry, there's nothing here. Okay, well, that's the app. How do we actually start serving HTML here, right? Check this out. I'm going to go into www.root. There's an index HTML page here. And this should look somewhat familiar. Head, meta, base, title, links. These look like pretty garden variety CSS. This last one here on line 11 is a little bit special. This uses something called CSS isolation to generate and merge together a special style sheet we'll learn more about when we talk about reusable components. But this is what's called CSS isolation, is what's being delivered here. More about that next time when we get into that topic a little bit further. There's here, look at this. We have a div with an ID app. That's just like what we saw inside the program, right? Let's do that. And I got to go back to that same folder. Dev, C#, sessions, season 3. See, if I only had this open the whole time, right? Okay. And if I do a more on program, more on, there it is, right there. It was right there, right? See that? Hash app. It's looking for a CSS query selector that is app, and that is right there. So this div, the contents of this div are going to get replaced with the output of our WebAssembly that's hosted inside of this app component, okay? So we saw that little router thing. Well, that router is going to load content and place it over this loading text. Interesting. Okay. We'll learn more about that. We'll see more about that. And then down here we have this thing, Blazor Web UI. This is just a little, Blazor Error UI. This is just some error interface in case we need to display that, hey, there was an error that happened and you need to reload the user interface. It's right there, right? That we'll see any kind of error handling. And finally, the last line, this is the important piece of this whole thing. Framework Blazor WebAssembly JS. This is how the browser knows how to open up, start, and bootstrap JavaScript. This is how it knows how to get the JavaScript loaded and start the WebAssembly. It goes through this thing right here, so that it can load your Blazor application. I see a comment. I see a couple comments coming in there in chat. Jeremy Knight. Let me grab that quick comment. I see some Emacs comments. Let me see here. Let me. Hey, Elliot, good to see you. Jeremy asks a question here. Is Blazor Auth ever going to be added to the template or GUI for a new project? Funny you should say that. Check this out. Check this out. .NET. New. Blazor WASM. Did you know you could say help on every template? Oh, come on. Move that up. There we go. So we can see a little bit more here. There we go. Check this out. Up here, you can add all kinds of configuration into your Blazor WebAssembly app when you build it. So you can specify hosted. We're going to see that hosted bit in a little bit here. We're going to turn on a hosted instance of this application. There you go. Type of authentication. So you can put authentication into it if you start with that switch. So that's pretty cool. But I don't want to dig down and get that far into things right now. Where was I? So we just looked at the index and we saw where all those things are that get us started. Let's actually run the application. Let's actually run this thing and see what happens. So I'm going to do a .NET. You know what? Let me do it over here. .NET watch run. And while that's starting up, Martine says, I use VS Code Vim religiously. It's not as good as actual Vim, but VS Code compensates with a lot of other stuff. Yes, absolutely. To have the full power of Visual Studio Code and still be able to use the Vim features that you like, navigation and some of the keystrokes, very cool to have that option available to you if that's the way you prefer to write code. Martine also goes on to say, how cool is it that a Microsoft guy is showing us .NET through Vim? I'm not using a Raspberry Pi right now. I'm using a laptop. but we'll be using a Raspberry Pi a little bit later on this month. Absolutely, we'll be doing that. But this is a laptop from K-Focus they lent me that we're using today that's fully tricked out. Got all the fun stuff in it. Now, where is it? I've got two mice here. You can see here the application started up. It's listening on localhost 5001, and I ran it with the watch verb here. This way, when the application changes, any of the source code changes, it'll automatically restart here for me. So let me head back over to Firefox. There it was. And I'll go out to localhost 5000, and it should route me over. There we go. And here it is. This is the HTTP version. There is an HTTPS version, and this is that default template that you've seen a handful of different places throughout ASP.NET Core. It's a very simple template. Doesn't have much here. There's an about link up here that goes to blazor.net, the homepage for Blazor. If you want to tell folks how to get started, it's Blazor. It's made by the .NET folks. So the URL is blazor.net, and then it goes to .NET, Microsoft.com, apps, ASP.NET, blah, blah, blah. No. Go to blazor.net. That's easy to remember. So there's 3 pages that are in here: home, counter, and fetch data. And this is running inside the browser. None of this stuff. Let me reload so you can see everything that's getting loaded down here. Check this out. Let me open this up. Now, I've already run this once or twice, so some of the content is being hidden from us. That's okay. And you see some of this is already cached for me. So it brought down that HTML file that we saw to start. Some CSS styles. There's the JavaScript to bootstrap WebAssembly. Information about what to bootstrap is inside this JSON. Favorite icon. And .NET as a JavaScript file in case we need to roll over to JavaScript backup. WebAssembly isn't running for some reason. So that's available. Now, if I go over to console, you'll see here, look at this. Blazor loaded 8.63 meg of resources. Now, this is running in dev mode, so it hasn't optimized any of this content. But you can see here, check this out. Look at all the DLLs that it put into the browser for us. What? What? Yeah, we use DLLs with .NET. So these DLLs, or .NET 5 DLLs, that have been compiled to run inside the browser. So ASP.NET Core authorization, components, configuration, file providers, logging, JavaScript interop. That's right, if you're going to write with C#, there's a bunch of other JavaScript libraries out there that are really cool for interacting with the HTML document object model. So why not give you a way to jump across, and from .NET, call JavaScript. Even better, from JavaScript, call .NET live in the browser. And we'll see more about that later in this stream. Let me see here. So there's the C#. I'm not sure why it included Visual Basic here, but Visual Basic is there. Collections, buffers, component model, console, system data, so you can work with data. All that stuff is here, right? Now, when you build and deploy, when you publish, the .NET, the .NET compiler, the build process will do a step called tree shaking, where any of these DLLs that you aren't using, it will exclude from delivery. So if you're not using, let me find a good one in here. If you're not using, well, reflection's a bad one to choose. Runtime. No, I didn't want to type anything just yet. If you're not doing some of the things around encodings in here, if you're not using XML link, if you're not using XPath, some of these things will not be included. They'll be omitted from delivery. But there's my application right there. And it's all of 17K delivered and running in the browser. So this is .NET 5. I'm not going to show .NET 6 during this series because .NET 6 is, at the time of this recording, Preview 1 is out. I don't want to teach and show you things that aren't yet supported. are highly subject to change, and I want to make sure that you see the existing running application. Is it DJB? Djib asks, so your DLLs are going to be public? Yes, in the same way that folks that build with Angular, Vue, React, choose your favorite JavaScript library, the content that runs in the browser is shipped down and delivered in the browser when you build and target WebAssembly. So these things are delivered and do run, yes, in the browser. So something that you should be aware of. And Jason, very good to point out, Xamarin uses a similar tree shaking process and linking, so all your code compiles down very, very small to reduce the size of the final artifacts. Funny you should say that as you're going to see with .NET 6, Xamarin and Mono and all those tools are being merged into .NET 6, and the tools are growing up and getting better, and we already saw that with WebAssembly as part of the delivery of this. Amber code, let me bring that up. Can Blazor run as a static site? This is actually a static site. There is no server-side rendering happening here. This application, I'll go back over, and this application is not delivering or running anything on a server. In fact, it's running on an index.html file. So there is no server-side rendering happening with this. This is WebAssembly running just in the browser. All of those DLLs that it was showing you, we've seen inside of a bin folder. Here's my debug. There's net50. There's my DLLs there. And if I go to, I believe it's in ref, is it? No. And my dub root folder. So all of that content, and if I ran a publish command, it's just those DLLs. It's serving those. Nothing is actually executing them on a server. It's just being delivered and running in the browser, and that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So if we look at the network, right, you'll notice those DLLs weren't showing up here. Once they're downloaded and cached in the browser, they're in browser local storage. And are you kidding? Thanks so much. Really appreciate that. I just doxed myself again, but over here this time. Give me a second. I dox myself even when I'm not trying to dox myself. And I think I'm in a different browser. I'm really good at that. What can I tell you? So, all right. That token is invalidated. Yeah, right? So, it should be, it's in one of these storages, and I don't, there we go, Blazor resources, there they are. So, these are downloaded now and stored on, come on, move that over, there we go. And they've got a hash next to them. So, when they get linked and they get compressed down a little bit, they're optimized for your application. It takes a little bit longer to publish, but you end up with a smaller footprint, and these get cached appropriately inside the browser. So that's pretty cool. That works nicely here. And I'm going to go over to network, and what I want you to see, I'm going to clear this out. I'm going to go to the counter here. And for some reason, my browser feels frozen. Refresh that. Did I? Oh, I stopped the application. No, it's right there. It's running fine. Stop. that should have, there it goes. Now we're going again. So, right, I've got a little counter tool here. I can click and it counts things up. This is running as C# code here. So check this out. I'm inside of Firefox, but I can also open this inside of Chrome. Let me open Chrome, because Chrome has a debugger that we can connect to with this. So check this out. I'm going to hit F12, go over to the console, and I can hit Shift-Alt-D, and I'll get a debugger running inside Chrome. So let me grab this, and in a terminal window, I'm going to execute that command. So let me go back to my terminal, and I'm going to jump into this terminal window here. No, go away. So now I have Chrome running, and I have this debugger available to me that I can use. Shift-Alt-D. So let me put this, over here. Thank you. And I'll put this one over here so we can see these two. No. I want you over here. Thank you. Close that. But check this out. I'm going to go over to sources. Down here I have file. Let me open this up a little bit. Pages. There's my counter page. And I have C# and Razor now showing up inside my browser. And here's the increment count button, right? So when I click this button here, this fires. So I'm going to put a breakpoint right there. And when I click that, I've now hit a breakpoint in C# in the browser, okay? It's not going to a server. It's not being rendered from somewhere. It's in the browser and running there. And you've got a full debugger. No special tools, nothing special installed. I started Chrome and attached to the development instance debugger. That's not available when you deploy a production instance of this. And I'm able to look at and work with this and step through my code. I have locals here that I can take a look at, call stack, right? So there's the current count value. If I let this run and click it again, there my current count value now is 1 right here. And I'm able to interact and debug and work through if all of my C# code that runs my WebAssembly application in the browser. That's really, really cool. All right. So let me close that. And you can even see the debugger running over here and throwing some errors on me. That's okay. Let me go back over to WebAssembly and Firefox, just because I'm a little bit more comfortable in Firefox. I see a couple more questions coming through here. Let me see. A couple of discussions going on there. Question from DGB. With Vue PHP, I don't share PHP classes. Here you can have shared models with sensible data. You need to be a bit more careful here with WebAssembly. Yes, you can, right? If I've got class objects, and we'll see this in a minute, with the hosted model, I can pass the same object from server to WebAssembly and interact with it if I have a server-side service that I want to interact with. And we'll see even more about that when we talk about gRPC clients, Open API clients as well later on. Curious Drive asks, is the lazy loading topic part of the course? We can get into that. It's a little bit further down, but I can certainly make sure we touch on that when we're getting into and getting deep on components. So, let me see here. All right, moving on. So here's this fetch data page. Now, this page is set up where, oh, I am in Chrome. I thought it was in Firefox. Let me go back to Firefox. There we go. So I have the network up. When I click that, see, it fetches this weather JSON file, and it's painting on screen this fake weather that isn't real weather anywhere in the world. From 2018, it's pre-calculated. Who cares? But the point is, it went and fetched this data and painted it on the screen, which is a very typical operation that you're going to take with a WebAssembly or JavaScript application. You have some sort of a service that's running on a server, on a cloud, maybe a nice fluffy blue cloud. I can suggest a lovely shade of blue. And you're going to fetch data from there. You're going to send data back and forth to manage on that service. And you want to paint it in the browser. You want to make it appear appropriately. So that's nice. You know, this is a model of how you do those interactions. And this is all, like I said, running in the browser. It just went and fetched only that data we needed, and you could see it only transferred 669 bytes. And the rest was already there and painted on the screen. So, WebAssembly, in this case, running the debug instance of this, it loaded, go refresh the page. It loaded about 10 meg, right? 8 meg, 10 meg of application into the browser. Now, if you're running on a mobile device, if you're running on some sort of portable device, a tablet, a laptop, having the entire application stored, cached effectively on that machine means you're going to get high performance running locally in the browser, and you're just fetching that data you need to interact with the server when you're clicking around here. So there it fetched the data the external data to load on the screen, but none of these other things are loading data until it actually requests data from the server. So Osimo asking, how am I displaying JSON on the page? Let's get into that. Let's show how these pages work, and let's show how I'm displaying that default JSON data on the page. So I'm going to go back over to the code, and I'm going to continue to use Vim for just a little bit longer, just so that it's easy for folks to see that, yes, you can do a little bit of this. I'm going to crunch down my server panel over here. But let me go up to, there's the project folder. So let me go into the pages, thank you. And let's take a look at the fetch data. That's where it was displaying some JSON on the page. So, like I said, we're going to use Vim. And here it is. This is a Blazor page. Now, a Blazor page looks like a Razor template where we've mixed and matched HTML with C#. Now, there's a couple directives that you'll see around here, and the directives all start with the @ sign, like you see there up at the top, @page/fetch data. That defines a route for this page. This page is going to respond and be delivered when folks navigate to the fetch data URL. So, just to verify, back here in Firefox, I went to the fetch data URL. All right, and I mouse over here, and you see localhost 5000 fetch data, and it presented this page. So this page, there it says weather forecast. This component demonstrates fetching data, and it has this forecasts object here. If it doesn't exist, it's just going to paint a little paragraph that says loading. Otherwise, right, see, and it flips between HTML and CSS with the @ sign. So this is standard C# here, @if forecast, just like we saw with Razor and MVC views and Razor pages in ASP.NET Core. It behaves the same way here. So if, else, and here on the else side, we're going to output it's an HTML table with a little for loop for each forecast object in forecasts, and we have a forecast object that has the date, the temperature, and some summary data, and just outputs each one of those TRs, one of those table rows, for when these are being interacted with. Continuing to scroll down, here's my code. This is the C# that's executing inside this page, and it's enclosed inside of a code block, @code, curly braces, and now all of this is C#, right? I've got a weather forecast class defined here, starting on line 45, okay? That has a date property, temperature in Celsius, a summary string property, temperature in Fahrenheit, along with the formula to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. And there's this event handler here on line 40, on initialized async. So when this page is initialized, it's going to put into the forecasts field that we see there on line 38, it's going to put into it await HTTP. So that's my HTTP client, right? That fetch data, get from JSON async. We've seen that before. That's an HTTP client method that allows us to get data from a web server in JSON format and deserialize it automatically into this type right here, weather forecast. So the data that's returned, it expects to find a weather forecast array from this address, sample data weather JSON. So it's going to go to that location on the current web server and return data. Scrolling down, that's it. That's all for my page. That's all that it takes to go and fetch that data. When it loads into this field, when that field gets updated, up here, this if statement is going to flip. The forecast now is something, so it will then output and paint that data. Cool, right? That's standard HTML. We know how to do standard HTML. And you can certainly get as crazy with your HTML as you would like to, as complicated, as dynamic as you would like to be, to paint the layout, paint the content that you want inside your application. You're welcome, Osimo. Happy to answer your question about that. Motown Andy has a question here, and it's getting just a smidge forward, but I'm happy to answer this. Is there a way to have code behind files created by default instead of having to create them manually? Not a big fan of having my code directly in the Razor page. Currently doing that manually creates a .cs file and creating the partial class matching the Razor page. Feel free to answer that later. So there isn't a way to do this inside of Visual Studio right now. But that's definitely the kind of feedback that they would like to hear, so that, you know, maybe at some point there's an option in the future to be able to pivot between the two ways that you can write code. So what Motown Andy is hinting at here is just like folks that build React pages, you can have your layout, your user interface mixed with your code here. You can do that. There are some folks who like to have a little bit of separation of those concerns and would prefer to have this C# content in a class that sits next to it. And you can do that by just naming the class the same thing as this file with a .cs on the end of the file name. More on that next time. We'll show you a little bit more on that, but I want to make sure we get through all the samples here. I've got a bunch more code to look at the other hosting models as well. So this is all WebAssembly, and it's running here on a server that I have on this panel. I'm going to close that panel. I'm going to jump down to this one, close that panel. Let me get out of Vim here. Thank you. So I have pages that I can use. Another thing that's interesting about pages is that pages are also reusable components. So I shouldn't have closed that other panel just yet. All right, fine. Reopen the panel. Move that over. Dev. Go back down through all the things. This. Yes. And there we go. So let me .NET Watch run that again. So it's sitting here and running. So if I go back into index, right, there's a thing down here on line 7 that looks like survey prompt. But a survey prompt, that's not an HTML5 tag. That's not a thing. Where's that coming from? There is up here inside the shared folder, there is this thing called survey prompt. And if we look at survey prompt, here is a div, and it has please take our, and there's a link out to the Microsoft survey. Please take our brief survey and tell us what you think. So this is a component that is being displayed right here. How is Blazor working for you? Take our brief survey, tell us what you think. So this is being referred to from this survey prompt razor, and it's being used with just that tag name. So let's get rid of that and let's add counter. We saw there's a counter page. I'm just going to put counter there and save that. And it didn't refresh. I'll refresh the page, and now my counter is here also. Every razor page is also a component. So I can use those tags to put one component inside of another. And the component is just the name of the file. So I'm able to use counter and just make that appear here. That's okay, that makes sense. And this is a completely separate counter instance from this one over here. Okay, so I'm embedding and I'm pushing components around, and I'm able to reuse them with something that as a web developer makes sense to me. It's a tag. I know how to use tags. I know how to wrap tags with other tags, and now I can build my own tags that are more complicated, that do more interesting things inside of them, and I can reuse them. That's where Blazor gets interesting. That's where we can start to really see some power. So if I go into the counter page here, we can define a parameter that we want to pass in here, and let's call this step, and we'll default it to 1. And I'll just go over here and say plus equals step. Okay. So now it's rebuilding over here. See it building? Done. Come back over here. Did it refresh? Let me make sure it refreshed. It should be refreshing on its own. Sure looked like it. So it's incrementing by 1s over here, but I made it a parameter. So I can go back into my index page, and it's a parameter, just like you would expect on any other tag. I can now say step equals 5. It's rebuilding. No, it's not refreshing here. And now when I click, it increments by 5s over here because I passed in that parameter. But over here, it still increments by 1s because that's the default. It wasn't set to something else. So now I can pass in parameters to a component. That's really cool stuff. Incremented by 2, right? Sure. I mean, right? So I'll just change that. Save. Give it a second. Refresh. And now it counts by 2. So, right? I mean, this is the basic get started sample. We can reuse components here, and that's the important thing that I want you to see. Now, one of the questions that we got just a little bit ago was, well, gosh, how does this work with security? How does this work with other models? This is running as a static website, but maybe you want to have it run integrated with an ASP.NET website. So there's another hosting model that you can use called, well, it's hosted with ASP.NET Core, not running on ASP.NET Core, hosted on ASP.NET Core. So let's look at that for a second. And I'm going to make sure that I'm using the same file name. Yeah, there we go. So this time, let me clear here. And I'll stop this web server. Thank you. So this time, let's say .NET new. I'm going to build another Blazor WebAssembly app. And I'm going to specify -- hosted. Generate an ASP.NET Core app to host this. And I'm going to output this into a folder called hosted web assembly. So it's going to go through, generate, restore the packages that I need. Done. And if we go into that folder, notice there's now 3 folders: client, server, and shared. I had a Sonny and Cher moment there. I was like, client and shared, that's like a singing duo from the 60s. No matter. This time, let me open this with Visual Studio Code. Let's work with VS Code now. And inside the application now, you see these 3 folders next to each other, and you see a solution file because there's 3 projects here that are related. So client is the WebAssembly project, just like we saw before. It's all the same stuff. You go away. It does the exact same things. And here in Visual Studio Code, I have a much better experience editing and writing code, and I have the ability to interact and get IntelliSense and all those things. IntelliSense works in Vim also if you have the plugins installed properly and you have that all running out there. So it's the exact same demos here. There's pages, there's counter, see? Increment count, it's the exact same thing. Index, there's that survey prompt, right? Fetch data, and it's fetching this time from weather forecast, not from a JSON file, because this time this app is now hosted inside of a server. Also, notice the weather forecast type is not declared right here. The weather forecast type is actually down here in my shared folder, and it's right there. There, it's the exact same class. But what we're showing here is this class is sitting inside of a project that's now being shared from the server, the ASP.NET server that's running wherever you host web servers, and delivered content that looks like this, that both the server and WebAssembly know about, that it's passing back and forth. So we have the same C# data, the same shape, the same schema that we expect being sent back and forth when we interact with a service. So here on the ASP.NET Core server, we've seen ASP.NET APIs before. Well, here's a controller base, and here it is, weather forecast controller. So it's going to be responding to weather forecast, and it's going to listen on this HTTP GET to just generate some fake weather forecast data. So it does the same thing. Let's run it. Let's run it. So this time I need to drop into the server project, and I will .NET watch run here. Now, .NET watch run will watch the entire stack of dependencies. So this server depends on the WebAssembly project and that shared project that has the weather forecast class. So it will rebuild automatically if I change any of those 3 projects. So Apricot, greetings to you in the Ukraine. That's right, this isn't my stream. This is over on the Visual Studio channel, and that's okay. Elliot asks, is the shared folder, the shared project, uploaded to the browser, or is it considered secure? The shared project is uploaded to the browser. Let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at what we get now inside the project. So I'm gonna refresh this, and now you see the title goes to hosted WebAssembly because I'm now using this version of the project. Oh my gosh, we're being raided by our friend Layla Codes It. How you doing there, Layla? Welcome in, Raiders. 33 folks joining us right now. Good to see you. Hello, hello. We're learning Blazor. This is our intro to Blazor session as we go through over the next 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks, talking about Blazor and getting things started. How is it over there on your stream? Layla, and thank you so much. Make sure you check out Layla Codes It. She's a board member of the .NET Foundation and a live coder on the Live Coders team. Really great to see you. Thanks so much for bringing your friends here with us. So this is a Blazor WebAssembly app hosted inside of ASP.NET Core. And there was a question about, well, is the shared content, is when I have a shared DLL, is that shared into down into WebAssembly as well? Yes, it is. Let me scroll. I've scrolled too far. Let me, come on, bring this up. And now we're going to scroll in this list of DLLs that were served. And where'd it go? I saw it. There's hosted WebAssembly shared and hosted WebAssembly client. It did not send down anything for the server. So you're working on Blazor and Azure functions with Assembly AI using Blazor Server Side. That's our next demo, is Blazor Server Side. So look at that. That's called a transition, right? That's a segue there. So my shared and client DLLs, all the things that I need to run the WebAssembly app, are sent down here. And I'll go over to network, and when I click fetch data, you'll see it still only calls and gets the data from the server. So that data is running inside my ASP.NET Core server over here. It's running and rendering and delivering from there. Okay, so now we have a way to run ASP.NET Core to generate and serve as an API service for us and deliver and host those DLLs that we want to put down in the browser. Even more so, if we take a look over here in the actual project, inside the server project, look at how almost simple it is to host the Blazor application. Inside my project file, you'll see it references the shared and client projects, the WebAssembly project. Hey, Thindall, good to see you. But inside my startup, look at this, right? We've seen the ASP.NET Core startup before, but now inside of here, add controllers with views, add razor pages. We know what those are. And down here, look at this, use Blazor framework files. So it's setting up so that it can listen to the Blazor framework, so it can participate in that. And down here, there's this final bit right here, map fallback to file index.html. That is where it's saying, here's where the application starts and where we're going to host and deliver content. If you don't have a razor page or a controller that knows how to handle things, deliver it in index.html. So my Blazor interactions will all route down to index.html, and then the WebAssembly router will be able to respond to that. Is that confusing? Let me get into the browser. Let me show you what I mean. When I click on counter, you see it goes to localhost 5001 counter. But if I go to forecast, it should have done a get there. Is it? Oh, it's weather forecast. Spell it right, Fritz. It gets me the data from the API, because the API is higher in the list. That controller is what is being mapped to first in my route list. Deflux, let me grab that question and come back to that in just a second. So, but if I go to some place that isn't here, like counter, well, I don't have a razor page called counter. I don't have a controller called counter. So fall back to the HTML, the index.html, and the index.html is served, and the router inside there says, oh, you want counter. I know what counter is, and I'll display counter. But if you try to go to some place that doesn't exist, like Fritz, well, it goes in all the way down. Well, I don't have a controller called Fritz. I don't have a razor page called Fritz. Let me send it to the index.html, and Blazor router looks at it and says, I don't know what Fritz is either. So it outputs that, sorry, there's nothing at this address that we saw in the router. That kind of makes sense, right? That's coming out of all the way down into here. Sorry, there's nothing at this address. Try some other page, Fritz. I save that. You'll see it's rebuilding over here. Refresh, and now it has that content. So we have a couple different ways to resolve and place content, and that Blazor and ASP.NET Core will resolve and go find these things. And this is the hosted on ASP.NET Core model. Let me go to Deflux's question, and then we'll take a look at running Blazor server side. Deflux has a coding stream idea. Something I'm currently facing is an Azure B2C tenant, business to customer tenant, and business to customer. And I have a Blazor WebAssembly application, and I want to send API requests to Azure Functions to interoperate with a bunch of services. I'm having a difficult time with documentation regarding authentication and authorization. Authentication and authorization with functions is not easy. And we'll talk more about security later in this series, but yes, we're going to cover that. Interacting with functions that do that, we might get into that, but we're definitely going to get into security with Blazor WebAssembly later in the series. That's absolutely a goal that we will touch, and it's on the list inside the repository. Not easy with well, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. So if I delete this and I go back to the rest of the application, it's there. Okay, so that's the hosted model, still delivering and running in the browser, but we also have the server there to help us out. Now, you can also turn on pre-rendering here so that the first time somebody navigates to a page, it runs through those DLLs on the server, renders that HTML content, and then serves that out to the requesting browser. We'll see more about that next time. I need to get into the server side interactions here. So the last hosting model that you can choose, I mentioned, is server side. Yeah, I'm going to close this one now. Thank you. So the server side application it's a whole nother template for you to use. And this time, all of our Blazor content is going to run on the server, and it's going to send down just the changes to the user interface using SignalR. So let's create one of those. .NET new Blazor server, and we'll call this first server. There we go. Generates that really quick, and I'll go down into the first server project here, and oh gosh, let's go over to Visual Studio Code. Let me open that folder. Here we go. Yes, that folder. Thank you. So now, right, there's a program CS here, and this is an ASP.NET Core application. It's running a web host, configures the default information, starts that up. Great. My startup looks just like the ASP.NET Core app with a few little differences. Configure services doesn't just have add Razor pages, but it also has add server-side Blazor. And we're defining a service for interacting with the weather forecast. More on that in a bit. Scrolling down here, there's all the things: developer exception page, HTTPS redirection, static files, use routing, and it adds 2 items in here for the routing. Map Blazor hub. This is the SignalR hub that's going to send user interface information back and forth from the browser. And map fallback to page host. So we saw in Blazor WebAssembly, there's an index.html page that has all of the things included in it for starting the WebAssembly application. Well, here, there isn't an index HTML in our www root. Instead, it's sitting over here as host CSHTML. Because this is running on a server, it's a Razor page that bootstraps and runs the Blazor application. So just like we had before, head with all the title and base and some links to some style sheets. Now, instead of having a div here, now we have a component. Type of app. Same type thing. We have our app Razor sitting here. Render mode server pre-rendered. It's going to pre-render this content as much as possible. Blazor error user interface, and it's going to behave differently if we're in a staging or production environment. But if we're in development, we're going to get this error message instead. Blazor Server JavaScript down here instead of the Blazor WebAssembly JavaScript. Behaves slightly differently. Thanks so much, Layla. Appreciate you stopping in and bringing your friends here to join us today. Take care. Have a good day over there. Let me take a look. All right, we're doing good. We're doing good. So inside of this now, it runs app Razor. And this looks identical to what we had in Blazor WebAssembly because it is. Blazor, whether it runs on WebAssembly or on the server, the components, the interactions you have between those components and building your user interface is identical. It runs the same whether it's on server or it's in WebAssembly. There are differences in how you interact with the rest of your application, though. Example, when you're running with Blazor WebAssembly, you can't necessarily make a request directly to a database using Entity Framework because that database is somewhere next to the web server in a typical network architecture. So if you have a WebAssembly project, there's a firewall behind that web server that you can't request through to get to the database. You aren't going to be able to request directly from the database. You have to go through the web server and do some sort of a API interaction. Here, where you're running on the same server, right? You're literally running your Blazor content next to and in the web server. It's right next to the database. When we fetch data over here, instead of requesting an HTML client so we can fetch data from some other server, we're injecting a weather forecast service, and our weather forecast service is up here, and this code that runs on the server, instead of generating, this may be making that entity framework call out to your database server to interact and bring back data and paint it here. Okay. So if we want to have flexibility for our components to fetch data, to have interactions, regardless of whether they're running on the server or in the browser, it's a good idea to pass around interfaces so that when you're running on the server, you can pass in that interface that interacts directly with the database server, or when you're running inside of WebAssembly, that makes those interactions through a API endpoint that makes those interactions with the database. It's your choice how you do those interactions, but by passing in an interface and taking advantage of dependency injection, you can change that strategy for how it does the interaction with a little bit of configuration. So this is doing the same thing, but let me actually show you this running. You see the exact same things here: counter, fetch data, index. Let's actually run this application and get into talking about how this one runs. So .NET Watch, .NET, yes, I know. .NET Watch run. Server isn't anything. Here I'm thinking .NET Watch, let's run the server-side app. That isn't a thing. Here we go. So now it's running. I'll go back over to Firefox. I'll refresh the browser, and you see it's now called First Server. But this time when I take a look at the console, there is no, and look at all these cookies that have been delivered and sitting in here. There is no Blazor content. No DLLs have been delivered into my browser. When I go over to the network and I reload, you'll see there's Bootstrap Min, there's my CSS, Blazor Server JavaScript, and that's only 243K. Some other CSS, and here, look at this. I've got a 101 that's connecting to WebSockets. I'll go back to the console and you'll see. Let me turn off the warnings. It didn't load anything into cache for this server. It's strictly all running on ASP.NET. It's being rendered and delivered. So if I go back to the network tab, down here on this 101, this is switching protocols. It's switching from HTTP to WebSockets, right? Upgrading to WebSockets. You see it right there. And if I go into, where is it? Where's messages? I want to see the messages. There they are. So now I can see the messages that are being sent back and forth. And these are being highly compressed. And as I interact with the page, and I haven't clicked on anything yet, it's sending these very, very small messages back and forth to indicate that we're connected and we're doing things. So now when I click on counter, nothing was sent back and forth HTML-wise over here. But things were sent over my socket over here. Let's look at that. So now I clicked on counter, and you see it dispatched a browser event. And if we click in and we take a look at this, right, we can see event handler ID was 2. It was the mouse. There was a click, and it shows exactly where on the screen that click took place. X, Y, all this. You don't have to do this. This is being done by ASP.NET and Blazor, sending information back and forth about where that click happened. Was the control key or the shift key or the alt key or the meta key being held down? Nope, it was just a click. And we changed our location because of that click, and we went to counter, the counter page. So when I go back, oh, wrong one. There we go. So what did it send back to that? Well, it said, well, render batch, and it passed a bunch of information back here. Okay, and it's all compressed up, so we can't see it. Let me open this up just a little bit more. And you can see here, class navigation link, class nav link active. That's how it's painting this over here. And on render completed. So somewhere in here, it should have passed. Here it is. Here's all the content coming back, right? Look, counter, current count, counter, current count. It's embedded in here and being managed for us. It's sending it back and forth. But importantly, all of that information, let me open that back up one more time. All of that information is sitting on the server. Now, I requested this page directly because I hit F5. So it went directly to counter, and what it returned was a pre-rendered instance of this page. There's the click me, and we can't see the counter content. There it is when I highlight, right? That's the response that was being sent back. It was pre-rendered on the server, so we can see it now. Okay. Here's that connection. Let me delete the messages that are in here. I'm going to scroll down. And now when I click the click me, so it increments this, there, that same dispatch browser event, it indicates, hey, this click happened. The server sent back to us. That's what the red arrows are. We received this from the server, render batch, and if we scroll over, there's where it's passing the one information that we need to paint, and it's specifying exactly where to paint it on screen. So this is being used all on the server, and it's passing tiny bits of data, 148 bytes, back and forth to render and interact. And you wouldn't know that this is WebAssembly or server side, because it's passing these HTML updates on every click back and forth. Now, when I clicked into fetch data, let me go back to home and reload that, right? So here's the content being sent back. Here's the messages. Clear that. If I scroll down there, when it did weather forecast, there's the click. Here's the information that it sent back. It did the request. It got all the data now on the server side, and it sent back the HTML to paint on the screen. So you're using the exact same Blazor syntax. You don't have to worry about how you paint areas of the screen. You're just updating your tags. You're just interacting and managing your interactions with your application. And ASP.NET with SignalR and WebSockets here is automatically updating just those areas of the application. And we haven't even sent a full K yet back and forth. We aren't even at half a K, just navigating around and interacting. So very cool stuff that will help you build applications. And what I hope you see here, the flexibility is works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. You can develop on all those environments. I showed you how you can develop with Vim, Visual Studio Code, and of course, Visual Studio 2019 and Visual Studio for Mac. So we're on Linux here today. We can do what we'd like here and develop and do those interactions. So there's a couple more things that I want to talk about and get through. We've got about 20 minutes left. This is a similar question that we get a bit when we talk about Blazor. What do I think of the rise of WebAssembly means for JavaScript over the long term? No difference. WebAssembly means that more folks in more programming languages can use their favorite language to program for the web in the browser. So there is an awesome WebAssembly list that you can go to, and you can see all the different languages now that support WebAssembly. So not just .NET, C++, COBOL, F#, Go, Java, of course JavaScript, Julia, Lisp, Lua, Perl, PHP, Ruby, Rust, TypeScript, and some of these are no longer being maintained. But the big ones, Python, PHP, Perl, yeah, they're being maintained and they're evolving. So what does it mean? It means that folks can build and work with their favorite languages. JavaScript is really how you're going to interact with the DOM when you need to grab pieces and interact with it, when you need to interact with the browser and hook things up to sensors and things in the browser. You need to connect through JavaScript. And that's okay. That's okay. You can connect these things together. But gosh, COBOL, what a choice. Comments, cheeseless craft. Yes, that's right. COBOL's there. You can use COBOL if you'd like. So there's capabilities here. JavaScript has been around and alive in the browser for 25 years. It's not going anywhere. WebAssembly is still being optimized. Browser vendors are making their browsers render and run WebAssembly faster all the time. Keep an eye on it. It's going to grow. It's going to get better as things grow here. Yep. There's some interesting programming language names in there as well. So we've seen the three different models that you can build and host applications. Let me go back to the WebAssembly one, just because I think that one's a little bit more interesting here. So let me go to what was it called? First WebAssembly, right? And let's get this one running again. .NET Watch Run, and I'm gonna need to refresh this. There it is. So now this is first WebAssembly again. This is running in the browser. Let me go back to VS Code. Let me change. I'm going to go to first WebAssembly. And this time, let's go in and let's talk about, we started putting counter in here. And we saw how we could create a parameter here. And it has this increment count method that's being called. Now, this increment count method is being called because there's an on-click handler set up on this button. So this is an HTML button, and we've pivoted the button. We've told it, hey, there's a C# event handler out here that you're going to trigger by using the @onClick attribute name. If we had used just onClick, right, that would look for a client-side JavaScript method. But by putting the @ in front of it, it pivots it and says to Blazor, when you render this, wire up to the click event of this button this C# method. And that's how we get those connected. Have a good one, Rick. Thank you so much for stopping in. We're going to get into more advanced content here. Yes. Yep. There's lots of stuff out on YouTube that you can check out, particularly from the .NET team. So check out youtube.com/.net. You'll see a C# with CSharpFritz playlist there. That's all of my intro content to get folks started with, well, we did ASP.NET in the last 2 months. Before that, we did C# for about 4 months. So check it out. So let me, so we're binding this method call to down here. Now, we also saw in fetch data, we can connect to the various events that happen. Is there something in here I need to save? No matter. So we have our conditional inside of our layout to decide whether or not to load the table layout, and a for loop. But we have this event handler here, on initialized async. There are 3 events in every Blazor page and component that you can handle. On initialized async happens that one time, that happens whenever the component is initialized and loaded. There's another one here. Is it going to give me the override so I can find it? Let's see, on parameters set async. Notice there's also a synchronous version, but there's on parameter set async. And here, the editor didn't behave quite the way I wanted it to. Protected override, this should be an async task. This runs, and this should be an await. This runs whenever a parameter is set on this component. So if you load up the component or you refresh the component and with new content, or you change the parameter on the component, this will be fired again. Maybe there's data you need to load. Maybe you need to reset the counter. You can change that here and do that interaction. So here, let's tinker with that. I'm going to go back to the counter, and let's do that one over here. So let's add that. I'm keeping an eye on the time. Protected override, async task. What was it? On parameters set async. There we go. Right. Yeah. So inside here, what I can do is, let's do console write line. You can do console write line inside WebAssembly. That's interesting. What's that doing? I will have to take a look at that. So we can say step equals, move that cursor, excuse me, and let's do some string interpolation and just write the step in here. So console write line. Well, what's the console when you're running in the browser? Well, the console is actually it's the JavaScript console. So you can you can interact with the JavaScript console using console write line. And that's something we're used to seeing here. So it's also useful if you're navigating to a similar route that needs to reload new data. Yeah. So let me reset that. Go back over here. I'm going to refresh the page, and we take a look at the console. So it runs the onParameter set at start. There it is. And if I go back over to home, step equals 2, because it included that other, this other component, and it set the parameter step equal to 2. Remember we did that right here. Well, what if I put a button here? We'll put a text box, right? How we doing? Oh, we got plenty of time. I can put a text box here, right? And we could put something here that says step interval. Now let's call it counter interval, right? And I could put some sort of value in here, right? Value equals 2, whatever. Right, and when I save that, that's going to rebuild and redeploy. And when I click back on my home page, when I refresh it, so now I've got my counter interval 2 over here, but this doesn't actually do anything. This isn't interesting yet. What if I took this and put it into a private variable? Private int, and at which point, let's not make this text, let's make this a number. And let's call this step. I don't need to make it a property, I can make it that, and let's default it to 2. So now, check this out. Instead of putting value here, I can say bind. And this will bind a C# variable to the value of this, right? Why are you giving me... I didn't do anything yet. Go away. There we go. So now it's taking that field and saying, well, one change and the value of this is actually this value over here. So now I can also put that up here as the parameter onto my counter component. Hey, sleepy developer. Thindall asks, can I use a property? Can I bind to a property on a class instance? Sure, absolutely. We'll see more about that in sessions going forward where we're passing data back and forth between different components, and we're sending data back and forth. This is just a simple example to show a little bit of what we can do here. So now I'll refresh, and there, step equals 2. There's the value there, and I get the little controllers here. But if I change this, notice that value changes, and I get step equals being reported from my counter because the onParameter set is being called, because it's changing the counter interval, binding it to that step parameter. The onParameter set method is being called, and it's outputting that value. So now I change that to 4, and now we're counting by 4s. I can kick it up to 5. I get the message step equals 5, and now I'm counting by 5. You have a complete event management and component management framework at your disposal. It can run here in the browser. You can run it in the browser, host it with an ASP.NET Core server instance, or you can run the whole thing on the server with the exact same code. In fact, we've got 5 minutes left. let's do that. Let's show that you can run the exact same thing on the server with the exact same code. So I'm going to go to first server. So this was all running server side, nothing from WebAssembly was running, right? Nothing was running in the browser. So let's copy over. I'm going to reach into first WebAssembly. I'm going to reach into pages, and I want to copy that index razor over to here. Thank you. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to reach over to first WebAssembly pages, and I'm going to grab counter razor, copy that over here, and overwrite that instance. And let's .NET run. So these are the same components, the same pages that were running server side. We're running WebAssembly. Now we're going to run them on the server. So I'm going to come back over here, refresh, and oh no, these routes are, what did I do? What did I do? I'm not in the pages. I put them down in the wrong place. They should be down in pages. My bad. And .NET run one more time. Put them in the wrong place. Copy them to the wrong place. Refresh. There we go. It's the exact same page. Nothing is running in the browser. But I increment and change that. Notice I don't see the console running here because it's running on the server. It's running over here. It's running on the server, so my server console is where that's being reported now. And I get the same interaction. It's passing the data back and forth. There it is stepping. And there it is doing the same update. So the exact same code, my components do the exact same things. What's the network tab looks like? Asks null ref check. I can show that real quick. I'm going to wrap up here right after that. That's our last question we're going to show. So, oops, wrong mouse. Network tab. So there is nothing else here after it made that connection. Here's the SignalR messages that were sent back and forth. And it sent a total of 9.8K to paint and refresh that content. Look, 140, 150, 160 as it was doing that count. Each one of these messages is tiny, 300 bytes. They're heavily compressed with just the message content needed to paint that section of the page. So every time you execute, it does a SignalR request. That's right. But they're very, very small. So all of your code is running on the server. Nothing is sent down to the browser except for updates to the user interface. So this is beneficial. This model is useful when you don't care about having the entire application. You don't want the entire application running on a device somewhere. You're good with having a big server that's managing the state of everybody that's interacting with that application. You are okay with passing these little data points back and forth. And in some areas where folks have don't have great network connectivity, maybe you're servicing some applications that run in the mountains or wherever, this is going to run great for you because you're passing just little bytes of data back and forth. I need to wrap it up. We need to call it a day here. Thank you so much, friends, for joining me. This was the first episode of our Blazor series. To those of you watching on Learn TV, thanks so much for watching. We will see you next time. And they're going to drop off in just a minute. There's a question here from Sector. Can we bind to a class inside of a Razor page with using binded properties can be updated in 2A like MVVM? Yes, and we'll get into that next time as we talk about doing more with reusing content in components. This video, like all the other videos in the series, you're going to be able to find out there on the YouTube.net playlist, youtube.com/.net. Check it out and look for the C# with CSharpFritz playlist. For those of you watching on YouTube, thanks so much for watching. There's links to the previous videos here and to subscribe to the playlist right over here. Make sure you click through and follow the playlist because there's lots more content coming once a week right there. And if you follow us on Twitch, you'll see us Monday mornings Eastern Time on Twitch TV/Visual Studio. Thanks so much for watching.